There are no living witnesses to what happened in that house. Only the photograph. A single frame, blurred at the edges, taken by a state inspector whose name was later removed from every record. In it, a young woman stands in the doorway of a sagging farmhouse, her body framed by shadow. Her dress hangs loose around her shoulders, but the fabric swells unnaturally at her stomach. Heavy and round, as if she were carrying something she didn't yet understand. Her face is half turned toward the camera, her mouth slightly open, and behind her, through the blackness of the room, you can just make out the outline of a cradle, small, empty, waiting. The woman's name was Evelyn, in February of 1957. She vanished from public record, her existence erased, her birth certificate burned in the courthouse fire that same spring. But before she disappeared, she gave birth to something the attending midwife would later call a quiet thing, because the child never cried, never opened its fused eyelids, never made a sound at all. What came out of her that morning wasn't a child in any ordinary sense. The bones were soft, the skull lopsided and thin. The arms ended before the wrists. The skin, pale and almost translucent, showed the veins moving beneath. Like a tangle of blue roots struggling for air, it lived for 17 minutes. Long enough for everyone in that room to know they'd seen something that should never have existed. The fire that destroyed the house began the next night. Some said it was lightning. Others said it was God's hand. But the midwife, Ruth, told a different story before she died. She said Evelyn's father had locked himself in the room with the dead infant, rocking it in his arms, whispering to it, calling it by a name no one else could hear. And when the house finally went up in flames, the sound that carried through the valley wasn't screaming. It was laughter. They buried the ashes without a marker. The state inspector's report vanished. The family scattered, changed their names, told their children it had all been a dream. But the soil remembers. The earth beneath that valley still exhales the scent of burnt wood and blood when it rains. And sometimes, when the fog rolls down through the trees, people swear they can see her. That same young woman, standing in the doorway again, clutching her belly, her mouth half open, waiting for something that should never have been born. Which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? The valley had no name. On the oldest county maps, the kind that still bled ink when touched by rain, it was marked only as Hollow 9, a shallow fold of land pressed between the Appalachian ridges where 3 dirt roads stopped without reason. It was the kind of place that didn't invite discovery, that seemed to recoil from it. Travelers who passed through spoke of the air being heavy, the silence almost wet. Birds never sang there. Even dogs refused to bark. By 1900, the valley was already dying. The coal men had passed it by. The timber companies found better slopes to cut, and what was left behind were families that refused to leave. Families that had once been many, but by then had become one, joined by blood, by history, by necessity. They shared the same last name. They shared the same graveyard. Over time, they began to share something else. The church was the first to disappear. Its preacher left after a spring flood uncovered bones that shouldn't have been there. Small bones, too many of them. The school closed next, its windows boarded, when the children began to look too similar to one another. Same pale eyes, same crooked teeth, same murmured way of speaking, as if their tongues were remembering words that no one had taught them. By the time Evelyn was born, the valley had folded completely in on itself. Outsiders stopped coming. The mail stopped arriving. No one noticed when the last store shut its doors. The people who remained survived the way their grandparents had. Off the land, off one another. They hunted deer when they could find them, trapped rabbits, grew potatoes and corn that came out of the soil pale and twisted, like the children who ate them. There were stories, of course. Stories whispered in nearby towns about what happened in the hollow after dark. That lights could be seen moving through the trees, that women gave birth to children whose fathers were never named. Hunters claimed to have heard laughter echoing from beneath the ground, not near the houses, but from the old mine shaft that had been sealed shut in 1912. Some said the people down there weren't human anymore, that they had lived too long in the dark, had forgotten what sunlight felt like, what difference there was between family and flesh. The state tried to intervene once, sending a census team in 1949. They never came back. Only their truck was found, its doors open, the seats soaked in rain. No blood, no signs of struggle. Just the engine still ticking, as if it had been left running for someone who never returned. After that, no one went near Hollow 9 again. Not until 1956, not until the sickness began. That's when Evelyn started vomiting every morning, her skin turning the color of ash, her eyes wide and glassy, like she was seeing something that wasn't there. Her mother thought it was fever. Her father said it was punishment. The truth was something far older than either of them understood. By the time the leaves began to fall that year, Evelyn could barely stand. The sickness had hollowed her out from the inside, left her shivering even beneath blankets, her body shrinking except for the quiet swell growing beneath her ribs. The other women in the valley saw it before she did. That subtle rounding of the belly, that slow, rhythmic pulse of life where there should have been none. They whispered among themselves, gathered around her like crows around a dying animal, their eyes darting to her father whenever she cried out in pain. Her father's name was Abraham. He was not old, 40 maybe, but his skin had the color and texture of bark, his hands thick with old scars from trapping and cutting wood. People said he rarely spoke above a whisper, that he prayed at night not to God, but to something buried in the ground beneath their house. The walls were full of strange carvings, lines and symbols, he said, kept sickness away. Evelyn's mother never questioned them. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than asking. When Evelyn began bleeding in her sleep, Abraham locked the doors and refused to let anyone in. He said it was the Lord testing them, that no doctor could understand what grew inside his daughter's body. The Lord's gift, he called it. But in the nights that followed, the women could hear her screaming through the walls, hear the sound of wood splintering, furniture thrown, a voice, his voice, begging the child to forgive him. Then came the dreams. Ruth, the midwife, said everyone in the valley had them. Dreams of water running red through the creek, of bones stacked like kindling under the floorboards, of a woman's shadow moving through the trees, carrying something swaddled in cloth that dripped. Each morning, they woke to find Evelyn's house darker than before, the windows nailed shut from the inside, the smell of blood in the air, even when the fires burned clean. By December, Evelyn had stopped speaking. She sat by the window most days, staring out at the grey sky, her hands resting on her belly as though listening to it. Her skin had gone thin and waxy, stretched too tight over bone. Sometimes her lips moved, but no sound came. When Ruth finally forced her way inside, she found Abraham on his knees before his daughter, his hands on her stomach, whispering into it like a confession. He told Ruth that the baby spoke to him in his sleep, that it had its mother's eyes, that it knew his name. The midwife fled that night, barefoot through the frozen mud, her mind already unraveling. But she came back in February, when the first scream split the valley open, a sound so raw that even the crows rose from the trees. She came because she knew there was no one else left who would, because something had to be born. It was still dark when Ruth reached the house. The moon had vanished behind the ridgeline, and the only light came from the fire burning low in the hearth. The door was unlatched. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with the sour smell of blood and ash. Evelyn lay on the bed, her hair plastered to her face, her breaths coming shallow and quick. The floorboards beneath her were wet, darkened in wide circles. Abraham was kneeling beside her, his shirt soaked through, his eyes wild. "She's bringing it," he said. His voice was low, almost reverent. "The child of our making." Ruth tried not to look at him. She focused on Evelyn, who clutched at the sheets like she was falling. The contractions came too close together, too violent. Every time she screamed, the fire dimmed, as though the air itself flinched from her voice. Ruth reached for her hands, whispered prayers she half remembered, but Evelyn's body was already betraying her, muscles tearing, bones grinding. When the baby finally came, the room fell silent. Even the wind stopped. Ruth had delivered dozens of children in her lifetime, but never one that felt this wrong. It didn't cry. It didn't breathe at first. It slid into the world like something expelled rather than born. Its skin was grayish, mottled with veins that looked almost black. The head was too large, the mouth small and lipless. Ruth saw no eyes, only thin, sealed membranes where they should have been. Abraham reached for it before she could stop him. He lifted the child to his chest and smiled, weeping as he rocked it. "Perfect," he whispered. "Just like I dreamed." The baby stirred then, its tiny fingers twitching against his skin. Its mouth opened in a soundless gasp, and for a moment Ruth thought it might finally cry. But what came out wasn't breath. It was a wet, clicking noise, like teeth gnashing deep inside its throat. Abraham didn't flinch. He pressed it closer, murmuring words Ruth couldn't understand, words that didn't sound human. When she tried to take the child from him, he turned on her. His voice changed, cracked into something ancient, something that crawled beneath the skin. "You will not touch what is ours," he said. "It carries the memory. It carries him." Ruth stumbled back, nearly tripping over Evelyn's body. The young woman's eyes were open now, fixed on the ceiling, unseeing. Blood ran from her mouth in a thin dark line. She was already gone. Ruth fled into the cold dawn, barefoot, her hands shaking. Behind her, the house began to tremble, the sound of wood creaking as if under some invisible weight. Then came the laughter, faint at first, then louder, echoing off the valley walls. It wasn't Abraham's laughter. It wasn't the child's either. It was something older, something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time. By the time she looked back, the house was burning. When the sun rose over the ridge that morning, all that remained of the house was a skeleton of black beams and smoke. The fire had eaten everything: the bed, the walls, the cradle that had been carved by Abraham's grandfather a century earlier. Even the ground beneath the foundation had cracked, scorched down to the clay. But the strangest thing, Ruth would tell the sheriff later, was that no bodies were found. Not Evelyn's, not Abraham's, not the child's. The official report said lightning had struck the roof sometime before dawn, but the sky had been clear for days. There were no storm clouds, no rain, no thunder. The neighbors, Those few who still lived scattered across the hollow told a different story. They said they'd seen figures moving through the trees just before the fire started. Not men. Not exactly. Tall shapes that moved wrong, slow and crooked, as though the bones inside didn't fit the way they should. For days afterward, the smoke clung to the valley. It stained the creek water black and left the cattle trembling in the fields. Birds refused to fly overhead. And in the ash pit where the house had stood, Ruth found something the size of a hand. Not bone, not wood. Something else, soft but unburned, folded like a petal. When she lifted it, she swore she felt it pulse once in her palm before she dropped it. It left a faint grey mark on her skin that never faded. The townspeople buried what was left. Scraps of fabric, a few twisted nails, the charred frame of the door. In the old churchyard, there was no priest to bless it. The church had long been abandoned. Its steeple broken, the bell rusted silent. They dug until the shovel hit something hard beneath the soil. Old coffins, small ones stacked close together. Ruth turned away. She already knew whose bones they were. In the months that followed, Hollow 9 began to rot. The crops failed. The livestock gave birth to stillborn calves. People spoke in hushed tones about hearing an infant's laughter echoing through the trees after sundown, followed by a low, hollow cry that seemed to come from beneath the earth. One by one, the families left, abandoning their homes to the forest. Ruth stayed the longest. She couldn't leave, not while the dreams continued. In them, she saw Evelyn walking barefoot through the ash, carrying the same child, its head resting against her shoulder. Wherever she stepped, the ground split open and filled with black water. And always, there was Abraham, standing behind them, his hands outstretched, whispering to the darkness that followed. The last time Ruth was seen alive, she was walking toward the ruins of the house, with a lantern in one hand and her notebook in the other. When they found the lantern days later, the glass was cracked from the inside, and her footprints ended where the earth had caved in. A sinkhole where the foundation once stood, deep and perfectly round. The locals filled it with stones, then left the valley for good. For nearly 30 years, no one set foot there again. It would take almost 3 decades before anyone dared to return to Hollow 9. By then, the valley had been erased from most maps. The dirt road overgrown, the bridge collapsed, the signposts rotted down to splinters. But in the early 1970s, a team of university researchers came from Lexington, chasing whispers of America's forgotten communities. They were historians, folklorists, and one man from the anthropology department who believed in things his colleagues laughed at: genetic memory, inherited trauma, and what he called echo births. The team found the valley exactly as Ruth had left it. The air was colder there, unnaturally so. Trees grew twisted, roots exposed and bleached white like bones. The remains of the old homestead were still visible beneath the weeds. The brick outline of the hearth, the blackened foundation stones, and the faint circular sinkhole that no one had dared to dig into. They set up camp near the creek, where the water still ran black, and began cataloging fragments, broken china, a rusted locket, a child's shoe. At first, it was routine, but on the second night, one of the researchers, a woman named Dr. Helen Mercer, woke the others with her screams. She said she'd seen someone standing across the creek, a woman holding something small in her arms. The men brushed it off as a dream. The valley had that effect. It warped the senses. But in the morning, when they checked the perimeter, they found bare footprints in the mud on their side of the creek. Small ones, child-sized, leading toward the ruins. That night, the team recorded the first sounds. A low-frequency hum that their microphones picked up from beneath the soil. When amplified, it wasn't static, it was rhythmic, a pulse, like a heartbeat. The anthropologist, Dr. John Cates, insisted on digging at the site of the sinkhole, despite warnings from the locals, who had guided them there. The ground was damp, heavy with silt, and something that smelled like rust. They dug until the earth began to move on its own. Soft tremors, as if something below was shifting. Then the air turned warm, the smell of iron grew sharper, and they heard it. A faint cry, a newborn's cry, muffled, distant, coming from below. The younger researchers wanted to leave, but Cates refused. He said this was proof of continuity, of the body remembering its own making. The child was never human. He wrote later in his field journal, "It was a vessel, and vessels don't die. They wait." The next morning, their camp was empty. No signs of struggle. No footprints leaving the site. Only the tape recorder, still running, its reel spinning in the silence. When the local sheriff recovered it a week later, there were 27 minutes of static. And then, just before the tape ran out, a single voice whispered, soft, like a lullaby, "Ruth, it's warm again." For years, the Hollow 9 tape was dismissed as a hoax, another Appalachian ghost story wrapped in academic arrogance. The university locked it away in the archives. Dr. Mercer's family filed missing persons reports that went nowhere. The sheriff, who'd found the recorder, retired within a month. He told his deputy he'd been dreaming of an infant's breathing under the floorboards of his house, a sound that grew louder each night until he left town altogether. But the recording didn't stay buried. In 1991, a graduate student digitizing forgotten field material came across it by accident. The file was mislabeled Hollow Genetic Study, 1974. He listened through the static, intrigued, until he reached the end. That whisper, "Ruth, it's warm again." He replayed it dozens of times, slowing it down, filtering frequencies. What he found beneath the voice chilled him. There were other sounds woven into the noise, patterns too deliberate to be natural. When spectrogrammed, the frequencies formed shapes, not words. Faces, dozens of them, faint but distinct. Eyes pressed against the waveform, like something trying to see through. The student sent his findings to a linguistics professor who specialized in phonetic patterning. 2 weeks later, the professor drove out to the university's archive building at 3 a.m., smashed the reel-to-reel recorder with a hammer, and burned the fragments behind the faculty lot. He never spoke publicly again. But fire doesn't erase everything. Always a copy. In 2006, a YouTuber known for exploring Forbidden Americana uploaded a 4-minute clip titled "The Hollow 9 Cry." Ryle found audio. It gained 80,000 views overnight before being taken down for graphic auditory distress. The description read only, "Recorded in Kentucky. The valley breathes." Listeners reported similar experiences: migraines, nosebleeds, the feeling of an infant's hand brushing their cheek through the speakers. One woman swore she heard her own name, whispered beneath the static. Another recorded her reaction, and when played in reverse, the audio revealed a second heartbeat, syncing perfectly with hers. That's when folklorists began calling it the hollow frequency, a curse that traveled by sound, a resonance that carried the memory of whatever had been born there. Those who listened long enough said the same thing. The hum changed pitch just before sleep, deepening into a rhythm that matched the body's pulse. A lullaby you couldn't unhear. By the time the authorities traced the upload to its origin, The account was gone. The only trace left was an IP address, registered to an abandoned house outside Pike County, not far from where Hollow 9 once stood. Inside, investigators found a burned laptop, a rusted locket, and a single crib sitting in the center of the floor. The crib was still warm. When federal investigators finally reached the valley itself, they found no signal, no birds, no wind. The air was dense, as if sound itself refused to move. The forest had reclaimed almost everything, but the ruins still bled through the undergrowth, the warped iron of the hearth, the stone lip of the old well, the faint circular scar where the sinkhole had been filled decades earlier. It wasn't a crime scene anymore. It was an echo chamber. The lead agent, Thomas Reddick, brought a small team equipped with ground-penetrating radar, hoping to confirm the rumors of graves beneath the homestead. The scanner showed movement at 20 feet, faint, irregular pulses that mimicked breathing. They assumed it was groundwater. But when they dug, the soil blood red, not mud, not rust, blood, thin, cold and black as syrup. They stopped digging. That night, the camp cameras recorded something strange. Between 200 and 300 a.m., the microphones picked up a pattern, a lullaby, identical to the one from the Hollow 9 recording. The voice was faint, almost kind, but every minute, it repeated the same 4 words. "It's warm again, Ruth." Reddick ordered the team to pack up at dawn, but one of them, a technician named Carter, was missing. His tent was intact, his boots gone. In the middle of the site, on the edge of the filled sinkhole, they found his handheld recorder still running. The final 23 seconds captured Carter breathing heavily, then whispering, "There's a woman down there. She's holding... Oh God, she's smiling." Then came the sound of crying, not human, not mechanical. Wet, circular, as if the valley itself had lungs. They sealed the site within a week. Federal jurisdiction. Unfit for excavation. It disappeared from public records, scrubbed from state archives. But Reddick didn't let it go. For months, he researched the lineage of the family who'd lived there. The Colliers. He traced their name back to a man who'd settled in the valley in 1799. A man whose wife had given birth to 12 children. Every one of them malformed, every one buried behind the house. The family stopped appearing in census data after 1912. And then, something stranger. The bloodline didn't end, it split. 3 descendants changed their names and moved across the state line into Virginia. Their descendants, in turn, spread out across the country. Dozens of them, some still living. All of them born with a small, gray patch of skin somewhere on their bodies, a mark shaped like a petal. Reddick tracked one down, a woman in her 30s, born deaf. She agreed to meet him in a diner off Route 64. When he showed her the photograph of the ruins, she went pale. She wrote a single sentence on her napkin and slid it across the table. "My daughter hums that song in her sleep." That same night, Reddick's house burned to the ground. No accelerant, no wiring issue, just spontaneous ignition, like the fire had come from inside. And somewhere, deep in the hollow, something began to breathe again. By winter, the valley was silent again. Satellite imagery showed no heat signatures, no animal movement, no sign that anything human had ever lived there. And yet, every few months, someone new found their way to it. Hikers, surveyors, drifters. None stayed long. Those who came back spoke of a sound that wasn't quite noise. A vibration that made their teeth ache and their vision blur. One man described it perfectly. "It's not something you hear. It's something that remembers you." In 2021, a documentary crew attempted to tell the Hollow 9 story. They brought high-end recording gear, Drones, night vision, the works. What they captured was nothing. No readings, no footage. But when they returned to edit the film, the audio timeline was already full, layered with whispering. Thousands of voices, some childlike, some impossibly old. The waveform formed a single word when visualized. Sure me. The editor deleted the file immediately. The next morning, she was found in her car, engine running, with the radio tuned to static, her lips moving as if she was singing a lullaby. That clip never aired, but one still frame survived the valley in infrared. The trees glowed faint red. The soil burned white, hot at the center, as if the earth itself had a pulse. The government sealed the region for good that spring. No maps list Hollow 9 anymore. Even drones lose signal above it. But every so often, someone driving through eastern Kentucky, late at night, reports hearing it. A faint hum rising through the car radio as they pass an unmarked road swallowed by trees. The hum slows their heartbeat. It sinks. And just before the static fades, a woman's voice whispers, gentle, maternal, "Ruth." It's warm again. And that's the part most people forget. That warmth doesn't always mean comfort. Sometimes it means something beneath the ground is waking up. Because the colliers were never gone. They were never ghosts. They were roots. And the valley still feeds them. When you pass through Kentucky at night and the radio hums, don't turn the volume up. Don't listen too long. Because if you do, you'll start to hear it breathing with you. And once the hollow remembers your pulse, it never lets you go.